Hello, everybody, Sales Hacker community. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. I'm your host today. I'm Colin Campbell. I'm the Director of Marketing at Sales Hacker. And joining me for a very special webinar is somebody that we haven't seen in too long. It's a familiar face, probably. He's an OG of the Sales Hacker community. It's Richard Harris. Richard is the founder of the Harris Consulting Group. He's also the Director of Training and Consulting at Sales Hacker. So anytime anybody asks us who should help with some training, Richard's the guy. Richard, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a long time. I used to host all these, and so it's a little bit different for me to sort of be on the other side of it. So I'm just so you know, Colin, I'm going to judge you a lot and see how good you are. So.
Everybody does, and you know what? I
think you'll pass.
I'm my own biggest laughing stock, so I'll just take it on the chin.
Cool.
So thanks for being here. I know you have a crazy schedule coming up next week because you're going to be at both Unleash and Rainmakers, and two events are happening at the same time. In some crazy way, you're going to be at both of them.
Yes.
So
I'm going to teleport magically. I'm going to jump into the Millennium Falcon, and I am going to break the Kessel Run. So record.
6 parsecs.
Exactly.
I know it's going to be. Was it 12? Yeah.
I think so.
It's going to be. It's going to be crazy, and so it means all the more that you took an hour out of your day today to spend with us in the Sales Hacker community. So everybody, what we're talking about today is humanizing sales management. Richard and I were talking several weeks ago, and there's just not enough training for sales managers out there. And actually, I think this goes for a lot of roles in a lot of companies. When people do really well, they get promoted to manager, it's a different skill set. And some people are more ready for that than others, but a lot of the time there's some training that really should be used and some things that people should prepare for when they're becoming managers for the first time that they don't always get. Stuff like how to delegate, how to handle uncomfortable conversations and coaching, and how to keep your people accountable for hitting their targets. A lot of these different things that kind of require practice that people don't get the practice. So I'm really excited we're covering this topic. Richard's got some amazing stuff to share with us and really cool insights and ways of thinking about this stuff. So I think it works for anybody who has recently become a manager, wants to become a manager, maybe even just a refresher for people who have already been managers for a long time. I think this is like a really useful little training we've got here.
I'll even throw it out there. If you're a Gen Xer, or your boss is a Gen Xer and they suck at management, they should be watching this. So feel free to send them this link, and you can just hashtag blame Richard. Like, it's okay. So
the passive aggressive email of here's your hint.
Yep.
So it's useful for everybody. Don't worry if you're not a manager right now, or maybe even if you don't want to be a manager, this could help you manage up. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff. I want to make sure that because you joined the live version, you're here for a reason. Get your questions in. So go down to the bottom right now, the Q&A box, pop that open, and tell us right now, are you an individual contributor or are you a manager right now? Because I'd love to get a sense of who's in the room. We can kind of use that to make sure we're being valuable for you, but also ask questions here throughout. If you're having tricky conversations with your employees, Richard's here to help. So let's get your questions in.
Yeah, I would even say, let us know how big your team is that you're managing, because I think context to that matters in a lot of these situations, and what you can do and get away with 4 or 6 reps is very different than what you can do if you've got 100 or 20, and you've also got 3 managers between you and them. So I want to make sure there's good context in there too. So
yeah, that's a super good point. And it looks like we've got a mix, and somebody is managing 15 unmentionables, which is interesting. 5, 8, 15, 13. There are a couple people who aren't managers, a couple people who are managers. Great mix. And somebody's got a hybrid role, so they're a contributing leader.
Nice.
All right. Great start. So just so everybody knows, this is a question we get a lot. We are recording this, so you're here to ask questions. Please interact with us, but if you have to step away, know that you won't miss all of it. We'll send you the recording afterwards. And with that, Richard's got his Star Wars shirt on. He's going to share his Jedi mind training, aka humanizing sales management tips with us.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I would do is, if you guys haven't read a book called The 48 Laws of Power, It's a great book. It's a little dark, but it will teach you a lot about, as a leader, what it means to be a leader. There's obviously some very interesting things in there, and there's some very dark things, but you should be able to find some really great books. And it's one of those books that you kind of read a chapter and then you have to take a bunch of notes about where you've been through. So it's not like, hey, let me just go read this and execute it. You're going to put some thought into it. So it's a fun book to read. A lot of this stuff too this is stuff I've learned. It's stuff I've shared. It's stuff I've learned from other people. So this isn't always my knowledge. I'll give shout outs to the right people because I don't want to take credit for something that I don't think is entirely my idea. Because I think there's a lot of great ways for people to get better at leading. The first thing I really want to talk about is, as a manager, we have to create this permission mindset. And feel free, wait till the end of the slide to take pictures because usually people do, but maybe we'll get the deck out to people too. But these are the kinds of things that you need to understand as you're becoming a leader, right? You have to empower people more than you fix their problems. If you constantly fix their problems, they're only going to come to you with more problems. Right? You're not there to babysit, and you need to give examples, right? People will follow your lead and they will take your advice and they will do the things that you suggest if you teach them the right things, right? It's a little bit like Survivor. So you do have to sort of go through that, and you can either spend 10 minutes arguing a point with somebody, or you could spend 10 minutes trying to teach them how to do it so that next time they don't come and waste 10 minutes of your time. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, I don't mean that when your reps come to you, they're wasting your time. But our goal is to empower these people. You're also going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, right? We have to own them. We have to admit them, and we got to move on. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go out and apologize and take on the apology persona of management. I'm really sorry, everybody got to do this. I'm really sorry you got to do that. Or I'm really sorry. Don't do that. But if you make a mistake, say, guys, FUBAR, that was me. Sorry, it won't happen again, right? Those are the kinds of things you got to do. You've got to give yourself that permission to give yourself to be a leader. One of the challenges. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to share a little story because one of the things you just said hit home for me. When I first got promoted to my first management role, I think I was 25, 26, and I was going from being an IC, a colleague of all these people, and then like the next Monday I came in and I was their manager, and I wanted to immediately start helping them be better, and I made the classic mistake of solving problems for them.
Right.
The problem that it caused for me in the long run was that like there were people who needed to hear that they had to be able to solve those problems for themselves, and they were a drain on my time, and therefore wasn't able to support the people who were pulling their weight on the team and bring them up and level them up more.
Yep.
And it dragged the whole team down.
Yeah.
So like how can people like make that switch in their mind? What do we have to tell ourselves to not feel like we have to be liked and fix everybody's problems immediately?
So there's a couple of ways. You can sort of call the meeting, right? Like, okay, everybody, I'm officially the manager. And you can say things like, look, my job is to help everybody. But I would also set out the expectations, right? We talk about this with our clients alone. And a lot of stuff we talk about today is same shit you talk to your own clients about. Like, there's nothing new that I'm going to tell you. It's just a different frame of reference. And set the expectations. Hey, everybody, these are my expectations, right? We need to hit the number. I'm still a part of the team. I want to lead the team. I want you to achieve things that you didn't even think you could achieve, right? Inspire that within them. And you just say, look, there are going to be times I have to make tough decisions, right? And some of them might not be popular. I want you to know that, I'm not unaware that they will be unpopular, but I've got to do my job too, right? So that's one way to do it, right? Like, you can be very direct, help set some expectations, let them do things. The other is you just start doing it, right? And this is the more subtle way where you might stop talking as much as you used to. You might not, go out and party with everybody. You might want to just set a strong structure of, hey, everybody, here's what our one-on-ones are like, right? We're going to have them every day at these times. Here's what I expect you to bring to a one-on-one, right? You have to tell them what you want them to do before you expect them to actually do it, right? When someone actually does something without you asking, well, gosh, we should praise that, right? We should be happy, right? I've got two boys, Riley is 10 and Bodie is almost 9. And, Riley the other day figured out something was going on with our dog. And he's like, oh, we don't have this up there. I need to go downstairs and get it. I wasn't even home. He just figured it out. Well, that's because hopefully I've been teaching him along the way how to figure some life shit out. And he did. And so I praise that. So make sure you set your expectations clear. When people actually overachieve or do things that you didn't even tell them to do, compliment it so they remember to go do that again, right? On the other side, you're going to have to actually do some negative things. Like, one of the, a friend of mine and I won't mention his name, but one of the important management tasks we learned early in our career was sometimes you're going to have to fire somebody within 30 or 45 days of becoming a manager. Not intentionally, not like, let me go figure out who I should get rid of. But I guarantee you, the day you take over a team, there's somebody at position 1 down to position 6. If you only have 6 people, there's someone from position 1 to position 10. And oftentimes you need to make an example. Here's the part that's counterintuitive. Everybody will easily choose number 6 or number 10. Sometimes you have to fire number 1 because they're a negative Nelly, right? Or a grumpy Gus, and they're bringing the team down. Not easy to do. You got to follow the right protocols. You got to make sure you do it the legal way, right? Make sure you check with HR if you have an HR department. Make sure you give people an opportunity to adjust. But sometimes that's what you got to do. And trust me, every time you get rid of number 1, the best part is number 2 becomes number 1. And guess what? Number 2 is pretty excited.
They're amped, yeah.
They're amped. So it's not like, oh, shoot, what am I doing? And I know this is a little bit controversial. So, I know some people will be like, what? I can't do that. It's going to affect my compensation. I'm not going to hit my goal. Well, that's true. But, what are they doing to the team overall? So, Colin, what's been your experience on that, Colin? Like, have you ever had to move in and I call it hug somebody out the door. When I say terminate, I don't mean do it in a bad way. I want you to hug people out the door and do it in a professional, polite manner. So,
yeah. I never had to cut a top performer. Actually, that's not true. I never cut a top performer. There are times I can think of where my top performer really wasn't behaving the way I wanted them to, and it was affecting the culture of the entire team. And I probably should have done more about it. I don't know if I needed to at least make it clear that they weren't meeting my expectations for behavior, even though they were hitting all the numbers. And then if they didn't fix it, that would have been something I would have had to consider. What I did have to do, this is my first, probably the biggest mistake of my career, is I joined a team right as several of the team members were looking for new jobs and leaving. So I moved into the role and had to hire 3 people in the first 2 months. And my manager was, we had check-ins with my manager, and she was saying, so you're going to hire somebody this week? You're going to hire someone this week, right?
Right.
And eventually I was like, yes, I'm going to hire someone this week. And I had 2 interviews that week, and I hired both of them, and they were terrible. Absolutely terrible. They went through the same onboarding process I did, the same training. They just didn't have the skills, the experience, or really the attitude to do the job well. And they did make improvement, but they were people that I should have cut very quickly. And the mistake I made was not doing so and trying to make it better and seeing the best in people that really wasn't there. Like the best in them was for another job.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing. I see a comment. I'm not going to sort of call out the person's name, but someone's talking about they have got some senior AEs who are underperforming. Here's the deal. They're no longer senior AEs, right? See, we often create senior AE based on tenure, which is wrong. Senior AE should be based on performance, right? And imagine how motivating it can be to someone to say, look, I love what you're doing, but I'm not going to touch your salary because that's an HR issue, right? Like whatever, but I can't call you a senior AE anymore. Right? I've got people who have been here less time who are outperforming you. They're the senior AEs now, right? And that's going to cause a massive ripple effect, right? But that's kind of as a leader what you have to do, because maybe those senior AEs will go out and quit. Well, if they were underperforming, I'd rather them quit than me fire them, right? I don't want you to do it in a negative way, but I want you to change your mindset a little bit. And then the question becomes, well, what if they underperform and then they overperform, and then, do I constantly have to keep changing titles? I don't know. That's part of the game. But you could certainly have the conversation to say, look, I'm not, if you don't get your performance up by this date, you're going to lose your title.
Yeah.
Right? Not lose your job, lose your title, right? See what happens.
Right.
Maybe that's enough of a message, right? It's a whole lot less threatening, right? You can't go complain to HR. You say he's going to take my title away. Well, all right. Well, believe me, I've been called into HR so many times I could care less, right? It's fun to me. It's almost like, yep, another notch on the belt, right? So, and let me rephrase that. I've not harassed anybody. I've not done anything inappropriate. I've not said anything in a gender biased way. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual managing people. So,
yeah.
I want to move forward a little bit on this next slide, because this is, and by the way, people, if you got questions, please put them in. Like, I'm happy to try and answer a question every now and then. But I want people to understand that this is what's happening in the world. This is called transactional analysis, right? And we all have 3 ego states. We have, at the top, you have the parent ego state, right? The parent ego state gives approval or judgment, right? That's going to be your mom and dad. When you try to tell them you were going to spring break in Mexico, they're like, what? How dare you? Right? Like that kind of stuff. It could also be your parents trying to be nurturing when they say things like, well, I don't understand what she does, but she's happy, right? Like they're passing judgment on us, right? Like I hear that all the time.
Yep.
You also have the child ego state. This is the child that starts the buying process. This is where this is actually the emotional you. When your feelings get hurt, it's the child that's upset. When you tell someone you're going to take away their title and they get upset with you, it's their child. They respond with, I don't want you to do that. I want this. I want that. Right? And so you've got to recognize these ego states. Now, as a manager, we're often in the adult ego state. And I'll give you some specific breakdowns in a second. But the adult ego state is where you do pros and cons, pluses and minuses. It's the rational you. So your nurturing parent, your parent gives approval or judgment. And they can do that in 2 ways, either by being critical, right? Like criticizing you, or being nurturing, like, hey, let me help you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Your child is your natural state. That is where your feelings are. Right? When you see a kid walking down the street and they're just dancing in the puddles because they're having a good time, right? That's just them being a natural child. You might see the parent of that child like rolling their eyes going, oh my God, get out of the puddle. Well, that's the critical parent coming in. The nurturing parent would be, wow, that looks like a lot of fun, right? And encouraging that child to be free. So the child says, I want it. And then your adult ego state gives you permission to move forward. That's the rational you. And I want you to understand this, is that when you're trying to have conversations with your AEs or your SDRs and you're trying to move forward in the conversation, look, here's the challenge, right? Like as a nurturing manager, you might be saying to Bob, hey, Bob, look, you haven't hit numbers the last 3 weeks. I really want you to focus on this. I need to get this performance here. You're being a nurturing parent. You're not being critical. You're just explaining the outcomes. You're being this nurturing parent, right? Mm-hmm. And their child is probably feeling wounded, right? Their child can react one of 2 ways. They can act as a free child and say, hey, Richard, you know what? Thanks for just laying it out there for me. I appreciate it. I'm going to go work hard on it. They could also become adaptive, because the child will always adapt to what the parent does. And so the goal, though, is to go through those 2 ego states to get to the parent, to get to a place where you can move forward. Can we agree that that these expectations now need to go forward? Well, that's you as an adult trying to talk to your rep as an adult and give and get permission to move forward, right? So you could have your rep turn around and go, yeah, you know what, Richard, you're right. I need to go focus on this. They're being an adult, right? They're being rational. They're looking at pros and cons, pluses and minuses. You could be an adult and be saying, hey, I need this performance level. Can we agree this needs to happen by next Friday? Well, they could turn into what I call the adaptive child, where they rebel and go, this is bullshit. I'm not signing this document. Or they may walk out or they may come in and go, fine, whatever, which means they're being submissive. And then they can walk out the door and start criticizing you to everybody, where they start to become vindictive, right? So I just want you to understand, the goal of this conversation isn't for you to walk out and all of a sudden, oh my God, I know exactly what to do. And I know this. I want you to see that this is how the psyche of the human mind is set up. And these are the things that you're doing. And our goal is to try and be nurturing parents. Our goal is to try and be an adult. And our goal is even ourselves as a manager. I can be a free child. I can be excited for someone else when they're successful. I can be disappointed if someone doesn't hit their goal. I just want you to be aware of this. And then I'm going to stop in a second, but oops, wrong slide, wrong one. The goal is, am I trying to be caring or am I trying to be a protector, right? The critical parent is often a protector, but you end up hurting yourself. Here, let me do that for you. I'll solve that problem for you. Well, that means you're protecting them, which in one hand is good, but you're not actually helping them accomplish it on their own, right?
Right.
And this is how I see it in the real world, right? What often happens too, and I've seen this a lot, there'll be some crossover. If you look on the upper right-hand side where we've got this caring, nurturing parent, if you overcare and do too much and then stop helping, your rep isn't going to become a free child. They're going to become adaptive, and they're going to become rebellious and submissive. So again, I just want you to understand the mindset of what we're doing. And I'll stop here and sort of, Colin, let you jump in with some thoughts on what you've experienced.
Well, so for me, this is why everybody says it's so critical that managers need to be self-aware, because it's not necessarily that you need to try to be a certain way or one way or another, because, we're all going to have our natural place that we kind of tend towards, but it's critical to be aware of that. And so I didn't have this tool. I wish I did when I first became a manager, but one thing that was pointed out to me, thankfully, or pretty early on, was that I want to be liked. And so I spent a lot of time trying to help and rescue. I was like the caring, nurturing guy. I wanted everybody to like me because I was solving their problems. But I wasn't creating, I was creating dependency, basically,
Yes.
is the way I was thinking about it. It's a slightly different way of thinking about it, but I wasn't enabling anybody, and I didn't have that permission mindset for myself to step away from those problems. The downside of the other side of the coin was I wasn't giving my employees permission to take care of themselves because I was so involved in trying to solve their problems. The one thing I've heard from the critical side is I've worked with other managers managing similar teams to mine who constantly view all of their people as underperforming or just nobody does anything. They make broad generalizations like, oh, they're all lazy. They're both equally bad. Like being overly helpful is just as bad as being overly critical of the team, and finding that place where you're not seeking a validation for yourself as a manager is important.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Gen Xers are having a real hard time, and I hope there's a lot of millennials on the line because they're going to love what I'm about to say. And here, hashtag blame Richard, and make sure everybody hears this. Millennials, it's not your fault, and it's not your problem to solve. You are neither lazy or inconsiderate or entitled any more than the fucking Gen Xers who are above you who feel entitled because they've done it before. That's just horseshit. Entitlement is bad regardless of generation. And I know this from my experience because I'm a Gen Xer and I used to walk around acting all entitled, right? That senior account executive title, guess what? That causes entitlement, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't have titles. I'm just saying it's out there and you got to be aware of it. So it's really, and the real problem for the millennials is it's not that the Gen X is angry at you. The real truth, and they're going to hate it when I say this, is that they're very jealous of you. You're getting all the love and attention and training and coaching that we never got. I got 2 days of product training. Here's the big book of objections. Now go over here and listen to Bob and watch him do stuff on the phone. Meanwhile, Bob never got anybody on the phone. Like that was my sales training. Right. So, that stuff just doesn't fly anymore. Like it doesn't work at all. So anyway, I'm gonna stop preaching and hopefully start doing a little bit more teaching. But
so we got a really good question from Tom Belgrad. Tom mentioned that he's going to be a manager soon.
Yep.
And his question is, how much does this dynamic change, or how should a manager think of themselves differently, if at all, when they're managing remote reps versus on-site? Like, does the distance, the wall of communication make this different in any way?
So, such a good question. And it was not planned, but Tom, I'll send you a Starbucks gift card. Tom and I went to college together, so thanks, Tom. But it's a great question regardless. You do have to give them attention. You have to, you're going to use more Zoom, right? You're going to actually want to have conversations with them. You're going to want to text with them to just say, hey, man, you know, I got 5 or 10 minutes. How's your day going? Right? Sometimes they're not, hopefully they don't need you to respond, right? But just the fact that you show that level of effort is different, because you get to naturally do that in the office. Hey, man, how's everybody doing? You know, you run into people at the coffee counter, you know, the coffee maker, or in the kitchen, or whatever, you know, whatever, you know, what I call the overindulgent snack bar these days. But so I think the key is to stay communicative, have an open line of communication, particularly to people outside the office. Make sure your one-on-ones never get shifted, whether they're inside the office or outside the office. Make sure that person outside the office, you ask them, right? Is it okay if I just text you once in a while, right? Maybe they don't want your help. Maybe they don't need your help, right? That there's value to that too. But use the tools and the technology that are available to make sure you have it. Don't try not to do your one-on-ones on the phone. Try to do them in Zoom so you can get a little bit of face recognition, those kinds of things. But those are my sort of best advice things. And I know people are sort of adding in the chat and the Q&A section. Go to the chat section of Zoom, and if you've got ideas, you know, for Tom on this one, or each other, tell people how you guys are actually managing people from afar, because I think it's really important. And it's going to continue. I see the office buildings are going to go away in about 20 or 30 years. It's going to be very, very different come that time. So,
yeah, look at us, Richard. We're the future.
Exactly. You are the children of the future. So I'm going to jump ahead. So accountability, right? Like, this is it. If you can't drive accountability to yourself or your team, you're going to have problems as a manager. And we kind of need to define that a little bit. And I think one of my favorite definitions, I think, came from Jocko Willink, from, if I said his name right, from God, what was the name of his book? But it was, it's all about the Navy SEALs. But
Extreme Ownership.
Extreme Ownership, yeah. And he said, you know, the Navy SEALs are taught that, look, I need to do my job so well that nobody has to clean up after me. And that really resonated with me, right? And as a manager, that's what I want to do. I don't want my reps to clean up after me, right? Mm-hmm. I want to try and, you know, do my thing. I need to own my stuff if I mess it up, but I want to teach my reps to do that too, right? And so just taking that mindset, I thought was really, really important as I was growing as a manager, right? Why do I have that in there twice? Oh, that's the same thing. One is to do my job so well, and one is to teach them how to do their job so well, right? How I do that, I also do is I teach reps to do that by encouraging them to help each other. Hey, you know, I think I know the answer to this, but before I answer it, why don't you go ask so-and-so, right? Start to foster that relationship, because then
the useful 3 before me rule.
I don't know that one. What's that?
This is one I never used it because I don't know, I thought it was too cutesy, but I did encourage my account managers to talk to each other before me. But the 3 before me rule is you ask 3 people before you ask your manager. So one can just be yourself. Like, wait a second, do I actually know the answer? Can I solve this problem? Mm-hmm. 2, try Googling it, you know, or like ask somebody outside of the workplace. And then 3, ask a colleague. And then tell me what you learned and ask me.
Yep. That's really good. I like that. The funny thing is like, generationally speaking, my natural instinct isn't to Google something. My natural instinct is to ask for help, right? Where I think the generation, you know, the millennials and the Gen Zs, like, you guys just know to go Google it. Like, it's just innate in you, which is really different. It's actually been a skill I've had to think about and be conscious of. And I see that with a lot of Gen Xers. I don't know if other people have seen it, and maybe it's just Richard being weird, but I see it all the time. So these are the ways that I do try to teach accountability, though. One is I got to know my goals, right? I got to know what my goals are and what my team goals are at the in the short-sightedness as well as, you know, the long term. And that doesn't mean just their revenue goals. I need to know my team of like, hey, my goal this quarter is to read 2 books. My goal is to hit my number. My goal is to do this many coaching sessions. My goal is to make sure go to my son's events. My goal, you got to know your goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got personal and professional, and they have to interweave them. Like, they're not separate anymore, right? That's called work-life balance. And then I need to know my team's goals. And I need to know what they're trying to accomplish in the job and outside the job. What are your hobbies? What are you trying to do? Right? Because I do want to help them do those things, right? If they're super interested in some outside volunteer activity, well, I want to help them achieve that goal at that activity, because that then sends them a message that their life matters, not just their work performance, right?
Yeah.
So
if you want to be a leader in the workplace, you have to be a leader of people regardless of where you are or where they are. You have to support them as people. It's not enough to help them do their work and then ignore the fact that they're a human outside of the workplace as well.
Totally agree.
Humanizing management, right? Like, this is the 101. You have to get to know your people as people.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it's really important. In fact, it's oftentimes one of the things that I would do, and as one of my very first questions, and you got to find the right way to do it, as I interview people, but I do try to make one of my first questions of like, hey, before we jump into this, like, tell me about you. Like, what causes matter to you? And I don't mean political, because I don't want you to go down that route these days. It's too dramatic. But, what are the things you care about outside of being a good worker? Because I know you're interviewing to be a good worker. I want to know what motivates you outside the office, because that's going to help me motivate you in the office. And again, it humanizes that piece from the get-go. It makes you different than every other interview they go to, right? At least for those, 90 people who are still here. So
that's a really good question. I like that one.
Yeah. And do it early in the interview, because it's going to make them relax. They're going to get to talk about their hobbies. They're going to get to talk about themselves, and they're going to go, wow, this person actually cares about me. And, we definitely go to good companies, but we also go to good managers. But more importantly, we don't quit companies, we quit managers. That's what all the data tells us, right? So you've got a great shot to make a first impression, so go for it. Setting clear expectations. I think we've talked about this before. Make sure you have real timelines, right? Make sure that you adhere to those timelines and that they adhere to them. One of the biggest challenges that I hear from all managers is they'll set an expectation, they'll set a timeline, and then the manager will forget to actually follow up on it. Well, right? And so then that means you're weak at management, right? Like, someone the other day told me, there's this whole thing about my town, and everybody's like, they hate the fact that it takes so long to commute from our town to the next town. And, my comment, this was on a public board, and I said, I don't want to hear about your problems commuting and how much time it takes. What I'd really like to hear about is your lack of discipline to actually be good at time management, because that's what your commute problem
leave on
is.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Or leave early. Like, it's not my job to clear the traffic for you, right? So that set off a whole litany of things, but people don't like to be accountable.
I had a colleague that would, please have an update for me by next Friday. And then, like, the following week, I would say, hey, did you get that update from Sarah? And he would go, no, she didn't give it to me on Friday. And I would say, well, did you, like, remind her on Friday to do it? Just because you told them once doesn't mean they're going to do it. It's a team effort. Like, you have to communicate. Which, that gets on people's nerves, like having to repeat themselves. But as a manager, you can't let it, because that's just part of the job. You're going to have to repeat yourself.
Yeah, and some people will feel like that's micromanaging. That's not micromanaging. That's called teaching accountability. And you need to be able to explain that to your reps. It's like, look, my job I'm not here to micromanage you. I have no desire to do that, but I need to drive accountability. And when you can prove to me that you do that, I'll stop asking. Like, it's that simple. That's setting very clear expectations, right? And again, if they make a mistake, so be it. Like, we're not, it's not brain surgery, right? Like, we are changing lives because we're trying to make more money and we're trying to do things and we're trying to empower people. But, we're humans, we're fallible, right? Nobody's going to die because we goof up, right? You want to feel real pressure and accountability, be a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon, right? Like, if you mess up, someone dies. Like, that's serious. So, and then this is the other piece about accountability. You got to ask for feedback, and you got to be willing to take it on the chin, because you're going to get negative feedback as a leader, and that's okay, right? but you got to be willing to ask for it, right? And you got to be willing to sit there and not respond when they say something. That's the key to leadership, is letting people sort of beat you up to a certain extent and being willing to just take it on the chin and go, yep, I hear you. I think I see your point there. I'm going to work on that. Now, if they keep beating you up after that, then you can defend yourself, right? So,
and salespeople should be really good at this one, because the key to asking for feedback as leadership, as a leader, is you have to, nobody's going to want to give you feedback.
Yeah.
You have to ask and then let the silence hang.
Yep.
And then if really nobody's answering after like 10, 20 seconds, ask again. Like, you have to push them to do it. They have feedback for you. Your employees don't think you're perfect. There is a way you can be better, but you're going to have to like build their trust enough and show them you actually want it by asking again and again. And then they'll trust you, tell you.
Yep. And here's the deal. Here's how I would ask for feedback is, how can I help you better? What can I do for you? Right? Really? Not, am I doing a good job? Right?
Right.
Like that, you're never going to get an honest answer out of that. You know, I talk to people all the time, and, you know, like I was talking to Max yesterday, who's now at Outreach, who had sales, who sold Sales Hacker to Outreach. And he was talking to me about what I'm doing next week at Unleash. And we got to the end of the conversation. I said, hey, Max, this has been great. Thanks for the advice on, you know, what I'm presenting. What can I do for you? Right. And it's a great way for Max to turn around and give me some feedback about what he needs from me. Right. And I'm certainly not Max's boss by any stretch of the means. In fact, I probably report more to him, you know, in that way. But that's how I would ask for feedback. So
that's great. I love that.
Yeah. So this is it. Okay. This is my favorite one. Well, it's not my favorite one. The next couple are, and I'm just going to pull these slides up really quick because they're too deep for me to walk through the whole thing. But there's no such thing as a difficult conversation in management. They're uncomfortable conversations, but they're not difficult, right? I'll tell you the most uncomfortable conversation I had to have with a sales rep. It's a long time ago. I was working retail right out of college. I was a manager, and this particular person was very heavy set, and I didn't mind. I didn't really care, you know, what they looked like as long as they could perform. This person actually had a challenging Badaroti issue, right? That's probably the most uncomfortable conversation I ever had to have with somebody. Not that I had to fire somebody, not that I had to put them on a PIP, but I had to talk to them about almost a very personal issue and coach them on some things. And I had to turn around and ask them. I said to them, you know, I don't mean to do this. I'm not trying to call you out, but what do you think we should do? What can we do to help you? Right. And granted, we weren't going to install a shower in the place, but, you know, it kind of happened daily. So we worked on it and figured out a solution for this person. And, you know, it worked. That's an uncomfortable conversation, right? That's worse than having to fire somebody. Firing somebody for me is maybe it's because I've done it enough and I've got a callous mind, but it can be done. The things you want to do, though, is just make sure that people that you talk, that they're even self-aware that the problem exists. Hey, have you noticed this? What have you noticed about this? You use open-ended questions. Hey, I was noticing this. What do you think's going on here? Right? What do you think we need to change? Let them solve the problem for you, right? As Chris Voss said, right? Use open-ended questions. They may be self-aware and they may go, yeah, I kind of know. And if you're in sales and you're underperforming, if they aren't self-aware and they're like, I have no clue why I'm in here, right? Then, you know, it's going to be a very interesting conversation, right? You're going to need to sort of call them to the mat, and they're going to have to learn how to become self-aware, right? And I do teach people to use that word. Hey, my goal is I teach you accountability, as I teach you about responsibility, and I teach you about delegation. You have to be self-aware. I have to be self-aware of me. I got to be aware of you. But ultimately, it's up to you to be so self-aware that you know what you need to improve. There are very few people I know who don't know what they need to improve in themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, look, I am not the skinniest guy in the world. I'm not the biggest person in the world. But I know that if I want to lose weight, ain't nobody else going to do it for me but me, right? That's being self-aware. I can choose to get up and go to the gym, or I can choose not to, right? But that's me being self-aware of me. So these are the tips on this one. I put this slide up if you want to take pictures of it. It's a really, really good one. If you've got questions around it, I will, but I don't want to read a long dialogue slide. But this is the practice of how I do it in a first conversation, and then what do I do after that first conversation. This does go back to, Colin, what you were saying about, setting a time limit, setting a timeline, making sure that, people come back to you based on the timeline you'd agreed upon. And if you have to go back to them and say, hey, waiting for your update, just say it that way. Hey, can you give me an update based on last week? They'll scramble. They'll figure it out. They'll know. But don't go, where is it? Just say, hey, I'm waiting on your update. Right? Because I don't want to micromanage them per se in that way. So,
that's one thing. I think.
Jump in.
It's a topic change, but people hate on micromanagement, and I think it has its place actually. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but anytime I work with a new employee, or even if I join a new organization and I have a new boss, I want to be micromanaged for the first, couple weeks, just first little bit. I want to know, operationally, am I doing the right things? Am I spending my time the right way? If that continues, obviously, that becomes annoying. But in the beginning, more information is better, I think. And it's less micromanagement and more teaching is the way I think about it.
I totally agree. And so this is such a generational thing, right? What millennials think is coaching and training, Gen X, we would have thought of that as micromanaging. We were like, just give me the 2 days of training. I'll figure it out. Right. And I agree with you 100%. I think you're dead on. Micromanaging in the beginning is okay. You can do it really well by asking a lot of open-ended questions, right? You can make it feel less painful, right? But I completely agree with you. That is the key. And again, I asked this question, another good interview question is, what kind of manager brings out the best in you? And what kind of manager brings out the worst? Well, everybody says, I hate managers who micromanage. And I then have to turn around and say, hey, Colin, what does micromanaging mean to you? Because what you think is micromanaging is going to be very different than what I think is micromanaging.
Right. And
so again, it's another good, it's a setup question in the interview to really get to have that micromanaging conversation, because it's going to happen, particularly in sales. So sort of moving on. All right. Here's the deal. This one came to me by my good friend, Scott Leese. If you don't follow Scott on LinkedIn, please do. He's a genius. He wrote a book called Addicted to the Process. It's a great book for new sales reps. It's even though it's written about transactional sales, it's all about the mindset. And he taught me this one was that, you got to change your frame of reference when it comes to delegating. And here's the most important thing. Everything you delegate will come back flawed. You should just expect that. Don't expect perfection. This is the challenge as sales leaders, where we turn around and go, oh, it'll just be faster if I do it myself because it'll be done right the first time. That's not the purpose of delegation. The purpose of delegation is to free up your time. So if I give Colin, I'm picking on you today, a project, and Colin comes back and only gets 30% of it right, well, Colin just saved me 30% of time. That's valuable to me. Yep. And now it becomes a coaching conversation. Say, hey, Colin, you know what? Maybe I wasn't clear in my direction. I really apologize. Here's what it really needs to be. Could you go back and fix that? Right? Then Colin is coached. Then Colin figures out how to do things and accept delegation. Right? So that's the first thing. Change your frame of reference. I promise you, that's the challenge. Expect it to come back flawed and recognize what it's doing for you as a positive thing from there. Right? The second one, there's no takebacks. If Colin volunteers to do something and comes back to me and says, Richard, I'm really sorry. I don't have time for this. I have to say, Colin, sorry, bud, you got to do it. It's no longer an option. Because if I do take it back, I've now enabled Colin to always give everything back to me.
And there's no accountability there.
There's none, right? Now, if grandma dies or mom dies, I get it, right? If my kid's sick tomorrow, I get, there will always be an exception, but, and look, I have a dog, but just because the dog's sick doesn't mean you shirk your responsibilities, right? But so you cannot take it back. Be very clear in your expectations and timeframes, right? Do not be their rescue boat ever. If you take it back, you lose credibility as a manager instantly and immediately, right? What's going to happen is the next person you delegate something to is going to say, well, you took it back from Colin. Well, now you have zero credibility, right?
Yep.
And believe me, I hear this all the time from my kid. Like, here's the perfect example, right? Last night, it was the kid's turn to bring in 2 trash cans from the street. Bodie was not feeling well, so I ended up bringing in 2. Riley brought in 1, right? Riley's comment last night was, well, next week, Bodie's got to bring in 2. Like, no, he doesn't. Next week, he's going to bring in 1 just like you're going to bring in 1. Like, just make sure that you own it each time you do it. Everybody has their share and their responsibility, and you take care of it. You have to be accountable as well. If you mess it up, you got to own that piece. There's no shortcuts to promotions. You want to see who wants to get promoted? You got millennials who want to get promoted tomorrow? Delegate stuff. I just talked to someone today. They're like, well, we're thinking about getting outreach, but I really don't have a sales ops person. I'm like, well, how many SDRs do you have? 3. Well, you don't need a sales ops person. See who wants to own it. And that gives you a chance to test their leadership capabilities, right? So do not do that. Tenure doesn't matter. Accountability is accountability. So
one of my favorite things from that previous slide is the having a clear goal. And let me know what you think about this, because something I've heard, and it makes sense to me, but I haven't talked about it a whole lot with people. I've heard you should delegate responsibilities, not actions.
I'd have to think about that before I could say I disagree or agree. I don't know. I have to understand the difference between responsibilities and actions. Those things feel very vague to me, and it feels like someone pontificating to pontificate. But I don't have enough context.
Maybe that's why I don't have a strong feeling about it either. I guess what I always thought, the part that made sense to me was if you're going to give somebody a task, you should ask them to achieve an outcome with the task, not just say, move these boxes from here to, not pick up this box and move it. Like, I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but I guess it's like a growth thing. So if you're going to give somebody something to do, it should be a learning thing, not just some busy work that you don't want to do, I think is the idea.
Well, I think you have to do both, honestly. So I do think that, because if I'm trying to groom somebody to come up next, well, they need to know what the shitty part of spending time in Excel is like. I got no problem delegating that stuff to somebody. I need to verify that their math is right. I need to check it, but they need to know it's not like it's one thing to say, hey, Colin, you're going to go own installing outreach, right? And figuring out how to work it and train the team on it. Like, that's a fun thing for someone to do. It's like, oh my God, I get to be the owner of this entire project, right? Well, guess what, Colin? On top of that, in 2 weeks, I want you to start showing me the metrics, which isn't the fun part necessarily, right? Now you're going to actually own it. And so I think you have to teach them both sides of the equation. But again, I don't know. I can't determine which is a task and which is a responsibility. So that's why I can't speak to that comment directly.
Maybe that's just the caring parent in me coming out.
Yeah. So this is another fun one. This came from my buddy Scott, also, who coaches 2 boys, and he coaches soccer and baseball. And there's no oranges at halftime. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, my kids don't get oranges at halftime. They're 10 and 9, the same age as my kid. I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. He's like, there's no snacks after the baseball game. Like, he doesn't allow the snack thing. Like, we're not here to have snacks. We're here to play baseball, right? And it was really interesting, and I really, really sort of relished in that and sort of thought about this, is that there really are no oranges at halftime in sales and sales management, right? When all else fails is you're going to have to terminate somebody, right? And you can do it in a polite way. I call it hugging someone out the door. Make sure you do it. Make sure you do your homework and those things. And it's okay to lose sleep on it. You're not supposed to like it, right? On occasion, you'll finally get rid of the a-hole that's on the team, and maybe you will like that. But for the most part, they're still a human being, right? They still have things to do. They still have a life they need to live, which now talks about the good part of terminating somebody, right? There's some benefits to it. First of all, the rest of your team members are going to be relieved, because they're going to know you're not going to put up with underperformance. They might be shocked because maybe it was the top performer, but they're also going to be relieved that if that person was so negative, they're going to be like, oh my God, thank God, Richard, you finally did that. That's what you're going to get out of it, right? The other thing too is that others are going to step up their game, right? Number 2 becomes number 1. Number 3 says, well, maybe I can become number 1. You're going to reinvigorate the team in a different way, right? And I think that matters, right? You're also, if you get rid of the people at the other end of the performance, that's quite okay. The thing that I like about, the positive thing that I tell myself about terminating is that it's actually better for everybody, right? It's better for me to let myself continue to perform as a leader and be with my team and help them perform. But also that person who's underperforming, they need to go find their better self, right? They need to go find, and it doesn't mean they're a bad salesperson. Maybe they're just a bad salesperson for Sales Hacker, right? Maybe they just didn't fit right? And that's okay. But now they have an opportunity to go make something better for themselves. And I would say that to people. It's like, look, I know this is painful. I know you're not going to like it. But here's the deal. It's an opportunity for you to go and reset yourself and go accomplish the things in life you want to accomplish. I don't think you're a bad person. I don't think you're a bad human. I don't even think you're a bad salesperson. It just didn't work here. Go do something else, right?
This is where those uncomfortable conversations you were talking about earlier, this is where those become so important, because if you didn't have those uncomfortable conversations and it's like, surprise, you really are bad at this and I'm firing you, that's the wrong way to do it.
Right.
You hired the person, right? Take some responsibility for it. Tell them they're underperforming, ask them what they want to do about it, check back in with them. And then, if it's still not fixed, then maybe they'll feel slightly relieved themselves and it is better for them.
They will over time. It takes a little bit of time for that to happen. Right? That's kind of why they say fire people on Fridays, right? Hire on Monday and fire on Friday, so that people can go home and have the weekend to kind of just, they can go out, get drunk and yell at you and do whatever, but they can blow off a little steam and hopefully get away from, the energy of the office, as opposed to like, oh shit, it's Tuesday and I don't have a job to go to. What do I do? Right. What do I tell my kids? It's like, if you give them the weekend, they can have some time to think it through. And I think that's the human way to do it, if you can. Not always possible, but I think that's one of the things you can do. The other thing I want to talk about.
Go ahead.
Well, I should say this one thing around the difference between difficult and uncomfortable. Difficult conversations focus on the negative. Uncomfortable conversations talk about the negative, but can focus on the positive. So yeah, it's negative that we have to go through this separation discussion. However, here's some positive things for you. Here's some takeaways I'd like to give you, right? I'd like you to be this. I'd like you to find this about yourself. I'd like you be a human. That's where it becomes a little bit more comfortable, not entirely, but it doesn't become quite so heavy-minded and negative on yourself and your own psyche. Sometimes it won't get heard because people are going to be in such shock, even if they knew it was coming. But try to find some positive things. Try to tell them that, look, here's an opportunity for you to go grow. Here's an opportunity for you to, I want you to come back to, I've said this before, I want you to come back to me, show me your commission check and say, F you, Richard, you blew it. I'd be thrilled if someone came back to say that to me. Like, they have my permission to do that. Go be successful. Go prove me wrong. Like, I'm good with that, right? That's okay. So you were going to say something, Colin. Go ahead.
What do you think about, so something I've seen done is if somebody's underperforming, the performance, the PIP, the performance improvement plan, or even just putting them like on a job search, instead of just letting them go, say, look, like, you've got a month, you got 6 weeks even, go try to find a job. I'll serve as a reference. I'll help you. I'll make introductions. What do you think of that as a way of letting people go?
I go back and forth on it. I'm a little bit more Gen Xer about that. Of like, I need them out the door because I don't trust that they're not going to tell everybody about it, right? Yeah. That they're not going to go sort of become a cancer. I also think you can set a dangerous precedence that if you don't let everybody do that, now you could actually be liable. That could be as much a California issue because that's the challenge out here about treating everybody fairly. On the other hand, I've actually done it. It was like, I want to say it was like November 5th or 6th. And we acknowledged at our company that, look, hey, this guy's not going to get a job in the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks. He has a family. He's got Christmas, right?
Yeah. Right.
He happens, not that everybody has Christmas. He just happened to celebrate Christmas.
He did.
And so we thought that was the humane way to do it, and which I was totally fine with. But we also had an agreement with them that's like, look, you can do this. You can go on interviews during the day if you let me know. You can't do your job search during the day. I still need you to do your job. If you want to go home at night and send out applications and resumes and all that stuff, that's cool, right? That's part of it. But you can't do it on our time, right? But if you need to go have a job interview or have a phone interview, I'll set aside time for you. So we had some very clear expectations and parameters around it. We also said we need you to keep this under wraps, because if everybody starts doing, it's not that we were trying to protect ourselves from a legal standpoint, is that we just didn't need to create the distractions. It was the end of the year. We need to hit our numbers, right? I'd be willing to bet he went to lunch with his buddies and told them in the office, oh, here's what's going to happen. Don't tell anybody, but
right.
we had to have clear expectations about what was going to happen. And it worked out well. He was able to eventually find a job. He was able to find something that was a better fit for him. And I think we did it the right way in that instance. So I go both ways, and I think some of it's cultural. I think some of it is legal. I think some of it is just, you got to think it through and do what's best for your organization. There's no right or wrong answer to that question, but it's a super valid one, and one I see all the time.
So we've got a couple minutes left. So people, if you're watching and you have an urgent question, throw it in there. We might have time for one or two more. One question that did come up earlier that we haven't touched, it's, an important part of being a manager, we haven't touched on it at all, is hiring. Do you have like a couple quick tips, like questions you can ask, ways to find top performers in sales?
Yeah. You did micromanage the interview. Here's what I mean. Salespeople are really good at what? Selling. And what are salespeople? What do we all get? Happy ears. So as a manager, I hear what I want to hear. So I want to hear, tell me about your biggest deal. Great. How many phone calls did it make? How many emails? Did your SDR do it? What got their attention? What did you talk about in the first meeting? What about the second? How'd you go from first meeting to second meeting to this? And if they can't answer those questions, then I'm not looking for them as a salesperson, right? Dials, emails, call counts, all that stuff. It matters, because I need to know if they have the discipline to follow a process. But I would ask it in a different way of like, hey, tell me about your process. Give me an example of your process, right? I avoid the, hey, what's your strength and weakness conversation. I ask it in a different way, which is, hey, if I were to talk to a previous manager, what would they say is your greatest asset? And what would they tell me is the one thing that you need to improve on? That's how you can figure out if they're self-aware. So those are a couple of my traditional sales questions. It's great. I'm going quick because this next question is awesome. I love it. I appreciate Augusto for asking it. Have you ever gotten fired? Fuck yes. And it sucks. I've been fired as a sales rep, and I've been fired as a sales leader, right? Because I would not accept mediocrity, and people didn't like my directness. I've probably been a little over direct. Again, not from an HR perspective, nothing bad, nothing threatening. I wasn't the guy running around like, look, just shut up and get back on the phone. But yeah, I've been fired. So I'm not sure what the context is for it, but yeah, Augusto, I have. And so some of this stuff has been through my own experience. I've also actually, the first time I had to let somebody go, I was working in retail a long time ago. It was at the Gap, of all places. And believe me, this is when they only sold Levi's, so nobody will know this. But I had to let somebody go, and our tradition was to walk people out, sit in the middle of the mall on the bench and tell them. And, of course, I had to let this one girl go because it was seasonal. Like, it wasn't even a performance issue. It was just seasonal. And she started crying. Right. Here I am talking to this young woman, telling her, the season's over, and she starts crying, and people are walking by going, they think I was like breaking up with her in the middle of the ball or something. That's probably my worst experience, having to fire somebody. So I know we got like a minute. If someone's got another question, but otherwise, I hope this has been helpful to people. I appreciate everybody's time.
It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I hope that my slides weren't too boring. And here's the deal: like, I'm not sorry that my slides are boring. I'm not here to paint pretty pictures. I'm here to help you learn. And if my slides didn't help you, from that standpoint because they weren't visually stimulating, well, I'm not sorry. So that's not what you're here for me to do, right? So I'm here to educate people.
Good stuff. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have like a crazy couple of weeks here with Unleash and Rainmakers next week. I think, people appreciated the straightforwardness. I don't think the slides are a problem. I loved them personally. So thanks again for stopping by, Richard. People, this is just a taste. If you want to hear more from Richard, you can find him under Training and Consulting on the Sales Hacker website. You can find him at theharrisconsultinggroup.com.
Yep.
You can follow him on LinkedIn and just connect.
I'm around. Cool. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks, Colin.
Bye. Yeah. I'll talk to you soon, Richard. Bye, everybody.
Bye.